So at the outset, I want to say that I think this is probably one of the more, if not the most important webinar that you ever attend. And the reason is because so many attorneys, regardless of where they went to law school, regardless of who they are, whether or not they're an LLM from a foreign country, trying to work in the US and not getting jobs, whether you're whatever law school you went to and you're trying to get a job, and not happy, or wherever you're working and not happy, this webinar is for you. I mean, this webinar really covers a topic that I've seen so many attorneys out there that not learn about, and that can drastically change the course of your career and of your life. I'll say right at the outset that I know a lot of attorneys that open their solo practices. I know people that went to Harvard Law School and did it. I know people that went to Yale Law School and did it. I know people that went to Stanford Law School and did it. And I know people from firms or law schools that aren't well known, like in LA, like Southwestern Law School or Loyola, schools that aren't highly ranked. And they did the same thing. And what's amazing to me, and I'll just kind of say this at the outset because it's kind of funny, is I think that most of the people I know that didn't go to the best law schools are actually the most successful when they open their own practices compared to the people that did it. But whoever you are, you can open your own solo practice and actually be very, very successful if you choose the right practice area, if you're in the right location, and if you have the personality that makes you kind of successful. You know, just in the past 6 months, I've encountered so many stories of people and met so many people that have just had just amazing success opening their own practices. I know a guy that he was graduated from Loyola Law School, opened his own solo practice in Malibu, doing trust and estates law, never worked for anybody else. And 3 years in, he was doing so well, he bought himself a $5 million house. And I know that because I know the person that owned the building that leased space to him. And she told me about this story. It's a true story. And he did it all on his own with his own practice. I know in this business group I'm part of, I know two people, one that started his own solo practice as a personal injury attorney and then branched out to creating services for other personal injury attorneys, and now has a business that was recently valued at like $250 million. I mean, these are some real success stories that I've seen. I know a very successful guy that graduated from Stanford Law School, worked at Quinn Emanuel, which is considered probably the best litigation firm in the country. Maybe not, but I think it is. And he opened his own solo practice doing family law. Now he charges like $700 an hour, and he has associates working for him and is doing very well. I know of another personal injury attorney that went to another third-tier law school, like some local law school in Los Angeles, took 4 years to graduate, and has his own jet. I mean, the levels of success you can have as a personal injury attorney or having a solo practice are just, through the roof. I mean, you can do so well with solo practices, and hardly anybody realizes this. I'm just trying to think of all the stories. I know another woman that graduated from Southwestern Law School and started No One Ever Hired. Hello, hello. Well, okay, sorry about that. I had an issue with my microphone. I know, and this woman lives in a $5 million house. So, I mean, I know so many people that have done just incredibly well opening their own practices. And, what I would say to you at the outset is you may be unhappy working for other people and not like your job. You may be unhappy because you can't find a job. You may have all these things, or you may be happy because you don't feel like you're being paid enough. And you may be unhappy for all sorts of reasons. And you may just lose your job. I know a woman that lost her job as a litigator in a firm in Delaware and didn't have any corporate law experience, but because she was in Delaware, she knew that firms around the country could use her to file different types of paperwork and so forth. And she started a solo practice, and within a year was making over $300,000 a year. And she wasn't even didn't even have any corporate experience. She just reached out to firms asking them if they needed someone in Delaware to help them with various paperwork and to have an attorney there, and did very, very well. So let me just be frank with you. If you pass the bar, that's a license to to be a solo practitioner. I mean, you can, that's a license to have your own business, and you should look at having your law degree as something like that. I see so many people that give up on their careers. I see so many people that, one example is just LLMs, like thousands of people from foreign countries come over to the US each year and get LLMs, and then they want to practice law, and then we'll hire them. Well, a solo practice, solo, if you're a solo practitioner, you can get clients. So I see so many people that are unhappy in law firms, and I'll just tell you a brief story of kind of what I did just to kind of get started. I clerked for a federal judge, a federal district judge. After that, I went to work at a big firm, which was small at the time, but Quinn Emanuel as a litigator. And then I went to another firm. And when I was in these firms, I was very uncomfortable. I knew that I could lose my job at any time. I knew that if I worked really, really hard, I might or might not make partner. I knew that other people would control my destiny. I knew that my income was limited by how much a firm would pay me. I knew all these things, and I knew that when I got to have 7 or 8 years of experience, I would not be marketable to firms unless I had business. So I learned all these things early in my career. And as a third-year attorney, I started thinking to myself, I really need to open a solo practice. I need to do something on my own where I can control my destiny. And I couldn't control my destiny if I was working in a law firm. So back then, there was only one real resource that people could draw on when they thought about opening a solo practice, and that was a book by a guy named Jay Thunberg. And that book talked about how to open your own solo practice, how to get business, and so forth. And it's probably outdated today, but today, I mean, anybody can have a website, anybody can do Google AdWords, and people become incredibly successful doing this. And you can too. I mean, there's just so many ways to open your own practice. And again, it doesn't matter where you went to school. It doesn't matter. None of that matters. What matters is if you're unhappy and you see limitations. I know a guy that he graduated. He was the youngest graduate in history of Harvard Law School, and he went to work. He had his choice of. He did really well there. He had his choice of any firm he wanted to, in pretty much in the country, to work in. So he went to work at Melvin Myers, and he was there for a couple of years, and he learned that if he wanted to bring in business, it would have to be these giant public companies, and that would be impossible for him to do as a third-year associate. So he wanted something that would give him potential, enable him to do really well. And his name, it doesn't really matter, but he is on the news now every night being interviewed. He's got this thing where he comments on national news all the time about different things and cases, which he was able to get through a PR person. He's got like 50 people working for him, attorneys and a firm in Los Angeles. So he's doing extremely well. And he's an example of someone that could have worked anywhere and opened their own solo. So it's important for you to understand that this is a huge opportunity, and it's something that you need to pay attention to and really consider as a career path for you. And I'll just make one other point. When you're working for other people, you're dependent on what they're going to pay you. You're dependent on whether they like you or not. Your hours have to coincide with what they want. You have a set role that you need to do. So if you're interested in marketing, they may not let you do that. If you're interested in another practice area, you have to do what they're paying you for. All these things keep you limited when you're working for other people. So this idea of opening a solo practice is something that every attorney, regardless of who you are, regardless of the quality firm you're at, regardless of whether or not you can find a job, should really consider. And it's a big deal. I mean, this is a very, very important webinar, and I commend you for watching it, because most people won't watch it. Most people won't consider this as a career path. And so you're very, very lucky today to be on this. And I just commend you for taking the time to learn about this, because this stuff is incredibly important. It can change your life if you really think about it and you give it some thought. Now, I'm not saying everybody has the skills and abilities to be a solo practitioner, because you need to be able to tolerate risk and you need to be able to do some marketing. But if you can get over those things, you can do very, very well. So when I started thinking about opening a solo practice, I'll just kind of tell you about it real briefly. I was at the Los Angeles office of a large New York law firm, and And I had been able to, just from friends, and this is during the kind of internet boom, bring in lots of small clients and do work for them at a high hourly rate. And I realized I had done this for like 1 year, and I had enough work to bring in a couple $100,000 of work a year. I mean, it wasn't sophisticated work. I was doing like web development agreements and independent contractor agreements, and nothing in fighting trademark infringement, nothing that serious, but I had work. And so I was looking at my law firm, and I was looking at them slowing down. I was looking at them letting associates and partners go. And I knew I could be next any time. I mean, I didn't know what's going on in business. And I was like, this is just freaking insane. And in my previous firm, the only way you could make partner was by billing a lot of hours, but then you were always dependent on the firm for work. And I was right, because everyone that made partner there without any work eventually was pushed out years later when the firm became more closely managed. So I thought about this option, and I realized that I could do it. And what I did is I took out a little ad. This is back when there was Yellow Pages advertising. That was kind of what people got business. I took out a little ad in the city I was working in, which is which is called San Marino. It's a small area, it would be 15, 20,000, I don't know, maybe less, in a suburb of Los Angeles. I took out a little ad, and I announced to my firm that I was leaving. And they said, "Well, what are you doing?" I said, "Practice." And I actually went ahead and leased like a shared work office space. And they said, "That's insane. If you do that, you're going to have a hard time ever getting a job in a large law firm again." So I investigated talking to recruiters, which is how I got interested in recruiters and recruiting. But I, when I told my friends and things that I was getting work for, that I was leaving, the billing rates would be lower, they were excited. And then when I took out this ad in the Yellow Pages, it was crazy. I started getting calls. I got calls for drunk driving. I got calls for employment suits, like suing people. I got calls for family law matters. And I brought in cases, and I did it before I even left. I mean, it was crazy. Like, all this work that came in. Now, I called the law firm a different name than myself. So if I ever decided not to do it, but my Yellow Pages ad was maybe $500 a month, and I was bringing in all this work. And then when I left the firm, I told everyone I was opening my own practice. They started giving me little tiny cases. And so I had all this work. Like, when I left my firm, they gave me like 3 months to look for a job, and I didn't accept any jobs because I really initially wanted to do this. And I had all this work. And I decided at that point I didn't want to practice law because I didn't like it, and started recruiting. And I gave away all the work. But what I'm telling you is, if it was that easy for me, and I did this, I was able to get all this work, a lot of it when I was still practicing, and then even more when I left. I was astonished. You can do it too. I mean, anybody can do this. And I got all these calls, personal injury stuff, and referred it to. I mean, it's really not that hard. I just want to let you know, if you have a belief in yourself and you think you can do it, you can. So I want to kind of open with that I was able to do it just fairly easily, and you can too. If you set your mind to it, and you're just right now, maybe you're unemployed, or maybe you're unhappy where you're working, you can do it too. And I'm going to talk a lot today about doing so. So I'm going to talk about the advantages of doing it. I'm going to talk about the challenges, because there are a lot of challenges. I'm just going to let you know at the outset that this is not something that's for everyone. It's certainly a risk anytime you do it. Then I'm going to talk to you about how to manage that risk, how to set realistic expectations for what you can do. And then I'm going to talk about whether or not this is something you should do based on what I talk about. And again, this particular webinar is incredibly important. It's something that can change the direction of your career and your life. And you need to think about everything I'm saying. Now, a lot of people don't realize it, but traditionally you would go to law school, take the bar, and set up your own practice. That's just how things worked all around the country. I mean, prior to Cravath, Swaine, and Moore, which kind of built this big law firm working for IBM and big corporate clients, most attorneys, when they graduated from law school, would hang out a shingle. I mean, this is kind of, just imagine the Old West, and there's like one attorney in town, and that's kind of how it was. And so you go to law school essentially to get a license to open your own business. And you take the bar for that. And that was, you passed the bar, you had a license to open your own business. And it's still that way. I mean, when you're an attorney and you're a solo practitioner, you have a license to practice law in whatever jurisdiction you're admitted to. You can charge for services that people that aren't lawyers don't. So people don't think about this. Now, instead of thinking about opening your own business, attorneys are thinking about starting the practice of law and going to work for someone else. And so I'm challenging you a little bit to kind of change that mentality for yourself and think about things a little bit differently. And again, if you are working for someone else, you constantly have to worry about, are they going to promote me? How much are they going to pay me? What can I expect? And what happens if I lose my job? And all these sort of things you have to worry about that you don't necessarily need to worry about when you have your own practice. I mean, I really want you to think about this. I mean, you can start a business, and you can start a business when there's no one else in that same business. I remember when I was in law school, I was in a bar and standing at the bar, and I met an attorney that had graduated from Wayne State University Law School in Detroit, which is kind of it's a very good law school, but it's a the people that come out of there typically work in Detroit. He told me, if I was you, when I passed the bar, I would go find like a small, smallish town in Michigan where there's not a lot of attorneys and set up a billboard and you'll be rich. And that kind of thought pattern, it actually works today. I mean, a lot of people do personal injury and they set up billboards. And I'll just tell you right now, the practice of personal injury law, once you learn it, 98% of it is bringing in the client, and then the other, maybe it's 95, and the other 5% is filing a lawsuit and eventually settling it for the most money you can. So this is what you can do. So that's why you see, for example, personal injury attorneys with billboards on buses and things, because they make so much money when they bring in the clients. And so, the bar, the license to practice law requires that you take 3 years of law school. Then it requires that you pass the bar. But once you've done that, you have this license, and you can take that license and do all sorts of things with it. You can take that license and find clients in a large market. You can do it in small markets where it's easier. You can do all these things that people that don't have that license can't do. And you can charge whatever you want for your services and all of these things. You can be very, very successful if you understand that your bar license is something that not a lot of people have. And the smaller market you go into, the fewer people you're going to be competing with, and the more clients are going to be. And let's just think about this for a moment too. So when you're working in a law firm, your client is the partners you're working for if you're an associate. And then as you get older and get clients, then it's the clients. But you're dependent, even if you're in a law firm, you're dependent on how much the law firm's going to pay you, whether you're an associate or a partner. You're dependent upon work coming in and all these sorts of things to keep your job. And you're dependent on the law firm for your security, not necessarily yourself, because regardless of the practice area you're in, all sorts of things can happen. I've seen law firms have a litigation department of 100 attorneys, and then a couple big cases are settled, and they let half of them go, regardless of what class year they're in, first years, third years, fifth years. I've seen the market slow down in different practice areas like corporate or real estate inside of law firms. And then all of a sudden the law firms let people go and you can't find a job. If you have your own practice, you don't need to worry about finding a job. And I really want to stress this to you, like how powerful this is. It's, you can do it any time. You can do it when you graduate from law school. You can do it, when after a few years of practice. You can do it regardless of the size firm you're in. You can do it if you can't find a job. You can do it all these different ways. And I know people that have graduated from top 10 law schools and set up their own practice. I had a guy working for me that it was pretty funny. He was he came to work for me when he had his own practice. So he had this little practice, and he was doing work for criminals and little tiny things. And he came to work for me because he wanted to get a steady paycheck. I think I paid him like $130,000 a year or something. And during that time, he still was doing work for his clients. And so he would split the money with me and then work the hours I needed him to. But something very interesting happened. Eventually, he decided to leave because he wanted to put all his efforts into solo practice. And he was an interesting guy. He graduated third in his class or one of the top 5 students in his class from the University of Texas. And he never wanted to work in a law firm. It wasn't his thing. He was a very smart guy, but not interested in working in a law firm. So he came to work for me for a couple of years. As he worked for me, he saw how I was marketing, like I'm marketing, I guess, BCGD, with webinars and articles and things. He saw how I was marketing what I do, and he became very, very interested to kind of watch me. So when he left, he actually had a job as associate professor at a law school that he was doing in addition to his own practice. But when he left, after 6 months or so, he opened his own law firm doing personal injury work again. And a couple of years ago, like I had someone, a friend of mine that had whose daughter was very, very seriously injured in a auto accident, needed someone to represent her. And I looked for him for some reason. I don't know how I knew he has personal injury practice because I really hadn't been in touch with him. And I called his office and I had to go through like 3 or 4 people to finally reach him. And he had this law firm again of like 20 people and was making an incredible amount of money and said, thank you. I mean, I owe all my success to what I learned about marketing from you, even though I thought that was BS. And he'd become extremely successful when prior to doing that, he never would have reached anywhere near his capabilities working for me. He never would have reached anywhere near his capabilities had he gone to work in a law firm. And now he's got a very happy and successful life doing what he loves. And now he has time for all these things like races, cars. I mean, it's just crazy. So, I've seen so many people do this, and I've seen so many people become successful. I've seen partners in large law firms leave to do it. There's so much success that can be had doing this. Last night I was reading about an attorney. He actually was disbarred and sent to prison. But initially he opened his own practice with just like one other attorney. I think he was doing like mass torts or something, and got all these settlements and was, buying himself like a $30 million yacht, all these things. And he worked as a partner in a large law firm in New York before doing this. Now he eventually went to prison because he started this law firm with it was called Dreyer Stein that had a couple hundred attorneys and he couldn't pay them all. So he was doing these scams and stuff. But it's just, you can be very, very successful doing this. And even if you start a solo practice, it doesn't mean you're always going to be working for is just yourself. I mean, if you do it right, you will have a business and you will grow that business, and you can actually have a large law firm like this guy did. And he basically started his own practice and he hired another attorney, and then he grew it, and then he grew it some more, and pretty soon he had too many attorneys they couldn't pay. But he was able to start a very, very large practice. You can grow your solo practice into to do a large firm, or you can keep it small. Or what a lot of solos even do is they will start their solo practice and it becomes successful, and then they find themselves merging into a large law firm. I saw some guys in Silicon Valley. They started this solo practice type of firm, and then they grew it into like 10 attorneys, and then ended up merging it into one of the largest law firms in the world, like DLA Piper or something. So this happens, and most law firms start out as very small solo firms, and then they make the right decision and grow them into larger firms. The firm I mentioned earlier, Quinn Emanuel, I mean, it started with 2 or 3 attorneys, and then the guys that knew each other, and then grow. Now it has over 1,000 attorneys. I mean, this is what happens when you can do this. And you may not be the sort of person that should be working for others. So I'm not saying this is the right decision for everyone, but for a lot of people, it really, really is. It's one of the smartest decisions you can make. And you may like the practice of law, like you may like writing, you may like meeting with clients, you may like doing deals, you may like all these things, but you may not like having to do that work for others. You may not like having to bill 2,000 plus hours per year and only get paid a certain amount of money. You may not like that, or you may like that. You may like the security of having people around you, and there's all these certain things. So I'm going to talk right now sort of about the top reasons and the top 3 reasons why attorneys, start a solo practice, and I'll kind of, give you some pointers about that and things you should do. But it may actually appeal to you. And here are some of the most common reasons that people start their own practice. And big one, I think, is you want to change the direction, and you want to be in charge of your own destiny. You don't want to make someone else or a group of people responsible for your own destiny. And I see this all the time. I see attorneys work for people, work for firms for as long as they can. Then they go to companies and they work there as long as they can. Often, if you open practice doing, say, uh, you're working for any type of firm, you may at some point the firm doesn't need you. So you'll do something like you'll go in house, and then you'll go in house and the company will go out of business, or the company will change its legal department around. All these sorts of things can happen, and you're not in charge of your own destiny. You're making others in charge of your own destiny. And how common is this? I would say in BCG, we have probably 600,000 attorneys that have submitted their resume to us in the past maybe 10 years. So it's that amount per year. And those attorneys that have submitted their resume to us, a great number of them, I would say more than 85% of them, have made people in charge of their own destiny. And a lot of times when they come to BCG, they're coming there because that's not working for them. So they want to find someone else or some other group of people that will help them control their destiny. And if you think about that, it's kind of scary, because this is a position that most attorneys are in. They're in the position of others being in charge of their own destiny. And I would say that probably at least 40%. Some people start their own practice because they have to, but I would say maybe even more than 40% of people start their own firms because they want to be in charge of their own destiny. And as I told you earlier, that's what I did. I started my own practice, or was doing that because I couldn't conceivably see a future where others were in charge of my destiny. I remember when I quit the first law firm I was part of, and that was Quinn and Manning. When I quit that job, someone came to talk to me from the firm, who a very well-known partner, and I told him, well, I'm a little upset. This person I know didn't make partner, and this other person did. And they said, well, yes, the person that didn't make partner only billed 2,800 hours last year, and the person that did make partner billed 33. And so we had to make that person partner over the other person. And I was like, this is insane. Like, this is how your destiny is determined. I mean, it's a scary thing. And it's something that I saw happen there. Someone else made this decision because this person hadn't billed enough hours. I know a woman that's now a very famous attorney in San Francisco. She's on talk shows and things, and a conservative commentator, but she also has her own practice. And she was a big firm and doing very, very well. And they came to her when they told her, when they were going to tell her what she made partner now. They told her she didn't make partner. She'd been at this firm for like 8 or 9 years, and they just let her go. They're like, that's it, you're done. And so she was in this position where she'd given all this effort and time to try to control her future, and it didn't work. And this is what happens to a lot of people. When you have your own practice, and you can start at any time, you're suddenly in charge of how much you're paid. You're suddenly in charge of what kind of work you do and what kind of work you don't do. You're suddenly in charge of who do you surround yourself with. Are you surrounding yourself with people that the law firm's hiring, or are you surrounding yourself with the kind of people you want to surround yourself? You're in charge of things like where you work. So when I started my own practice, I used to have to drive downtown every day. And it was like, it could be anywhere from, the city I was in was Pasadena. It could be anywhere from 30 minutes in rush hour to an hour. And I had to sit in the car. I had to do the same thing when I went home. And so when I started my own practice, I started at 5 minutes from my house. And I knew that I could, if I wanted to, I could go to the office. If I didn't have to. I knew that I could control how much work I did each week. So I would sit down, and this was, before I decided I didn't want to be a solo practice, but I would sit down and I would say, okay, wow, I've got 40 hours scheduled for the next week. So I know that's $12,000 I can make billing out at $300 an hour. And if I take these personal injury and other cases, I can have this potential. And so I had control of all of that. And I wouldn't have been in that position if I had to be dependent on a law firm to give me work. And if they didn't have work, I wouldn't be in that position. And I would have to do the work that they gave me. And I wouldn't be able to do certain things. Like, I wasn't old enough to go to court. That was for partners. I wasn't experienced enough to do trials. That was for partners. All these things limited me when I was working for other people. And that's the same thing that happens to a lot of attorneys that work in law firms. So if you work in a law firm, here's what happens. So your work is always going to be questioned. The quality of work you do, the amount of work you do, how many hours you bill, which I guess is the amount of work you do, The quality of your work is going to be graded against other attorneys. You're going to be essentially working for, as an associate, lots and lots of partners, maybe, or some, and you're going to be dependent on them giving you work, them liking you, other people getting closer to them. All these things are going to impact the type of work you get. And if you're a solo practitioner, you can make mistakes, of course, and you will, but you're not going to get fired for it. And you'll be accountable to your client, doing the best work you can and as much amount you can. But your work is not going to be questioned to the degree it would. So in large law firms, if you're an associate, you may have a senior associate. If you're a junior or mid-level, review your work, and then after that, a partner may review your work, and all that sort of things happens, and it can be very scary for some people having the work questioned like that and never being able to make a mistake. But if you're a solo practitioner, you can do that. And again, working for another attorney in the firm is going to mean that you're going to be dependent on what kind of work you're given. So the law firm will give you what they want. They'll give you busy work. They'll give you things you may not want to do. And so other partners and other associates will give you different type of things. I knew a senior associate at the firm I was at, Dewey Valentine. He was didn't make partner, and he knew he wasn't going to make partner because there was a mistake in a firm-wide memo that went out. And it was kind of funny that it was an HR director in New York, and Dewey Valentine at the time had all these offices all around the country and in the world. And she sent out an email to all partners. It was supposed to go to all partners, but when she typed it in, it was all personnel. And it had these lists of people that were up for partner and people that were going to be let go, people who were going to, these are people that were going to extend their partnership for a year, people that were going to make counsel and not partner. And so this email went out to everyone. And there was a guy that was on my floor, and he was like, I don't know, been working at the firm for like 12 years and hadn't made partner yet. And a really nice guy, just very motivated, smart. And what had happened is Dewey Valentine had brought in all these partners with a lot of business from this firm called Paul Hastings. And so they suddenly had control of the firm, basically, because of all their work. So they decided this guy that had been at the firm for all this time wasn't going to make partner, and some people that they brought in that were associates were going to make partner. So he was very upset, and they turned off like power in the office and all to make sure that people weren't reading this email, even though it happened. And then on Monday, the person that sent the email was fired. This was on a Friday, but so he was very upset. And then on Monday, a partner that was had like $30 million in business and was the one that decided had control of who would make partner or not, came by his office and gave him this really stupid assignment. It was like something that you would give a first year attorney with 6 months of experience to do. And he was doing it like in a kind of a not a nice way, like trying to kind of get the guy upset. And the guy did get upset. It's like, after what happened on Friday and partner, I'm a little upset right now, and I prefer, I know what you're doing, and I don't think it's very nice, and I don't really want to do it. So this partner walked away, and then he came back to the guy's office. Keep in mind, this guy's worked for 12 years and great work. He came back to his office and he said, I have two options for you. One is you can take this check for $30,000, whatever it was, and sign this agreement not to sue us and all these things and leave today, or you can leave today and not take the check and not sign anything. So keep in mind, you've been working there for 12 years. You turn down one assignment when something like that happens, is people control over your future, and he loses his job. I mean, just out on the street. And, that's not a nice story. But this is the stuff that can happen. You dedicate your life to a firm, and you find yourself in a position where the firm is suddenly letting you go with you have no other options. You're just left with this little check or whatever. And this is scary. I mean, this happens to people. And this would not happen had the guy been a solo practitioner. He was a real estate attorney. If you're in a practice area like real estate, you can market your service to people that have small real estate companies, to other real estate companies, do it more cheaply. And he could have had his own practice, but he didn't. And you can, when you're in any type of firm, you can lose your job for anything, even an inconsequential mistake. I mean, I've seen people, I saw one guy not too long ago, he was a junior associate, and he had been working like 7 days a week for weeks. And then he was expected, he was just completely burned out, and he'd been up to like 3 in the morning the night before working on this deal. He went home and he hadn't slept for so long that he slept in, and he missed a closing, which he just kind of needed to sit there. There was nothing he needed to do, but he missed it, and he was late, and he lost his job and fired as a 6 or 8 months of work, and suddenly fired in New York, and it's almost impossible to find a position if you get fired in 6 months in New York. You went to top 10 law school, and you can be anybody. You can be a great student at a top 10 law school. You can be in the biggest firm in the world, and you can lose any type of, you can lose your job, and that doesn't happen for some. You can, when you're in a law firm, the law firm will even decide the types of clients you can bring in. So you can't just go out and find clients. If you're at a huge law firm, you can only bring in giant public corporations, and the work you bring in can't conflict with other clients they have, and you can't, you can't know what's going to happen. I mean, you can have you bring in a big book of business, and some partner that doesn't like you can lobby against it if you're an associate. You can bring in a client, and there's firms where even if you bring in the client, if someone may have known that client 10 years previously, they get credit, or the law firm will have a conflict. So when you're working for a law firm, you can get a potential client, but you may not bring it in. And if you're an associate, like your first 7, 8, 10, 12 years of practice, it's very hard to bring in big clients with an associate title. So you can't be guaranteed you're going to bring book business in. And let me tell you sort of the importance of business. So the importance of business means you always have work to do. So if you have a big client, that client, and if you're close to them, that client is always going to give you work to do. If you work in a big firm, you're dependent on them for giving you work. But if you open your own practice, you can bring in any type of client you want. And one of the most important lessons for any legal career is when you're working as an attorney, the most important thing is always to have work to do. So that's why, things slow down, attorneys look for jobs. That's why people, when they get senior and they know they're going to be forced out of a law firm, that's why they go in-house to have work. Everybody is scrambling to have work to do. And that's the name of the game. It's the name of the game whether or not you work for a law firm. It's the name of it when you're expected to bring in business and have work to do. And it's the name of the game when you're a solo practitioner. You always want to have work to do. So you always have to ask yourself, what do I need to do in my career to always have work to do? I mean, this is the number one thing. Is being a solo going to give you that work, or is working for someone else going to give you that work? When you're working for a firm or someone else, your compensation is under other people's control. So you can get paid very, very well as an associate, and you can potentially get bonuses, but not all attorneys do. The compensation of partners can be subjective. All this stuff is under the control of other people. Even partners with large books of business do not always get the amount of money that they want. The law firm can change the compensation from one year to another and say, well, things are slow this year, so we're going to pay you less, but we'll make it up to you later, and they don't. All sorts of things are dependent, your compensation is dependent on others. And what does that mean? That means that if you go to a law firm, you could have a $2 or $3 million book of business, and the law firm will take you to do all that work, and the law firm may pay you 20%, may pay you 30% effectively of the work, or whatever that number is. You're dependent on what they pay you. So you're always going to be dependent as an associate or as a partner on what other people are going to pay you. And there's other things too that are kind of a lot of firms have mandatory retirement age. So you could have this huge book of business, but when you get to be a certain age, 60, 65, you have to leave the firm. I mean, there's all these sorts of things that happen. When you are a solo practitioner, when you're working in a law firm, you also often need to have face time. So what does that mean? That means that the law firms often will require people to be in the office. Now, there is remote work, of course, but law firms are now, want people in the office, and you're going to be dependent on having as much face time as possible. I talk to partners all the time, and they're talking about why they don't like certain associates and things, and it's always like, well, this person never, often leaves before the partners, or this person gets to work after the person they're working for. So you're expected to have that face time at all levels. I mean, you're expected to make sure that you're seen in the office as much as possible, and you have to do that. I mean, you have to be there when you may not want to be, when it'd be more productive to work at home. When you're working for a law firm, you're dependent on them giving you a secretary that you may not like. And you certainly when you have your own practice, you're not responsible for that. So you could have someone that's good or whatever. And you're dependent on them for everything. And if you have your own practice, you're going to have control over who you choose to work with. And all sorts of things happen when you're in a law firm. Like I've seen multiple, like 2 or 3 times when partners had affairs with their secretary, and then because of that, they ended up losing their jobs. I saw one partner in Chicago, another guy with like this huge book of business. It was like 10 or $15 million, and he had I don't know, like 5 or 6 years previously had an affair with a paralegal who wasn't even working for him, and he was at one of the top law firms in Chicago. Well, what happened is at some point the boyfriend, that I guess she'd been cheating on her boyfriend, and he was really mad about it when he found out 5 years after all this stuff ended. And he called the law firm and told them about it. And the law firm let him go immediately, basically said that you had an affair with someone that was not, there wasn't another partner. And so you could theoretically have control over them. And they fired him. I couldn't believe it. And I tried to help him find a job, but because he'd been fired for this stupid thing, well, I guess it's not stupid, I'm not going to call it that, but he'd been fired for this, no one would hire him. And he ended up going to work for like some sort of bank or something, and you leave all his business behind. I mean, this stuff happens. I mean, it's scary. I knew another partner, I'm telling stories here, but I'm just tell you the risk. I know another partner that he was working in upstate New York for a big law firm, and there was this particular firm wasn't casual dress, and so the law firm had a casual dress day, and he wore some ripped jeans to work, and that then I guess there was rip near his underwear or something. Didn't show anything private, but it was close to his crotch, and a female associate said she was very, very offended by that, and he too was fired and couldn't find a job. So these sorts of things, people you work for, and all these things can control your future. And you can make one little mistake, and then your career in a large law firm or working for any large law firm is over. Other law firms have different political climates. So different partners come in with different political agendas. And so you could be working for someone that's in charge of everything, and then suddenly that person leaves, or suddenly someone comes in that has more power. And I told you about the firm I was at, where another firm came in all of a sudden with more business, and everybody that was there wasn't getting. I mean, the whole political climate changed, and it affected the future of everyone there. In law firms, there are hourly requirements, and people are often evaluated based on how many hours they work. So if you're working for a major law firm in some city, you won't have your own business, and you'll be working for them, and you'll be expected to work 2,500 to 3,000. I mean, 3,000 is pretty extreme, but lots of hours. And it takes a toll on your health. I mean, it is not healthy to be inside that much time. And it's not healthy to be under stress working all the time. And it can be very, very difficult. And I will also say, in most law firms, when you bill those hours, you're not building your career necessarily. You're just building a law firm, and you're not doing it for your own clients. You're doing it for other people. And then that time, even if you're making a lot of money, you're not building a business. You're just dependent for this paycheck, and it may be a large paycheck. You may be making $300,000 or $400,000 a year, but you're kind of front loading the compensation you could make over time working on your own. You're front loading it earlier in your career. And when you leave that firm, other than the money you save, you're not going to have a lot to show with it. And And then you may be limited in the practice area. So you may be doing one type of corporate or one type of real estate or one type of litigation, and you may want to have do other types of things and be in control of that as well. So having your own practice just makes a massive difference. When you have your own practice, you have just control over the type of work you're going to do. And again, if a law firm fires you, which happens to partners, it happens to associates, it can ruin your career. I mean, it can make it impossible for you to get a job in another large law firm again. And when you don't have that, what do? You have to find someone to hire you, and it's probably not going to be as much money. And you're going to have this kind of scar in your resume. I've seen attorneys. I knew one woman in Atlanta, and Atlanta's not a huge legal market, and she was fired for something. I have no idea what it was. I don't think it was anything bad, and she was a nice girl, and she was blackballed. Like the firm she worked at would not give her good references. They would just say bad things about her, and so she ended up getting a job in California. But she didn't. Her career really didn't take off until she started her own practice, and she actually started a very successful practice doing software agreements and charges a lot of money and is doing very well. But she's happy as a solo practitioner. She's been blackballed. Lots of people get blackballed, and so and you don't have to start your own practice when you're in a law firm. You can start it if you're in house. You can start if you're in the government. It doesn't matter who you are. You can always start a solo practice. And how do you do it? Like what practice area do you choose? Like what do you do? And I remember when I was thinking about starting my own solo practice, and there's much more of that stuff today. There's online groups that show you how to start a personal injury practice. There's that you can subscribe to. There's all these different resources out there now. But when I was younger, stuff wasn't on the web. You'd have to order courses and stuff. And so I'd order courses. I learned about tax resolutions, potential practice here. I learned about trust in estates and all these different kind of family law and all these things you can start your own practice in. So there's a lot of resources for you to explore if you're ever thinking about starting your own practice. There's just all sorts of different different types of things you can find to learn about it. And it doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what your practice area is. I've seen people that are corporate attorneys start family law. I mean, it doesn't matter. You can, regardless of what you're doing, regardless of what your status is, you're employed, unemployed, new graduate, anybody can start a solo practice once you pass the bar. And I think, a lot of people that start their own solo practice, it doesn't really matter what your first job is. Sometimes people will work in insurance defense, or they'll work for a firm that does a certain type of litigation, or they'll work for a firm that does a certain type of corporate work for a certain type of clients. And they learn about that practice area. They learn how partners are bringing in business. They learn about how the work is done, how to cut corners and cut corners. And then they come up with ideas of how they can do things better and more efficiently. They start their own practice after they learn. They learn from others, and they take that experience and make it into something greater. And maybe they say, oh, I can do it more efficiently for clients, or I can do other types of work for these clients that's not being done. They just kind of come up with all these ideas. And it's very common, by the way, when sometimes you'll see these little groups of attorneys that split off from big firms, and they go to the clients and they say, we can do it more efficiently, we can charge less money, we can get you better results, we can do all these things. So they always have like some sort of angle that they use to get clients, and they'll have another angle they'll use to recruit people. Like you can, I don't know, you can work from home all the time, or you can control, I don't know, but they kind of come up with these business propositions to make the practice that they kind of spin off and they learn about when they're working from the people they're working for. So all these sorts of things, if you're working for any firm, you should be thinking, how can I take this experience and how can I build it into something that will enable me to start my own practice? What can I learn from this? What can I learn from the people there? And when have I learned enough? When have I learned enough? I knew a guy that he was in the office right next to me when I was at my final firm, and smart guy. He went to Stanford Law School, very, very smart guy. And he was doing all this real estate work. And he'd been there like 4 or 5 years, and just basically he was very smart. He didn't show his ambition to the partners there. He was just learning. And during that same period of time, he was interested in real estate investing. So with his family, he was buying multifamily properties and different things. And the skills he was learning, he knew would help him do real estate development. And then also with those skills, he knew he could open his own practice. So he opened his own practice and it became very, very successful. But his real estate investing at some point, 2 or 3 years in, overcame all the work that he'd been doing as a solo practitioner, which he was very successful, but he decided to get into real estate. So he took all that experience he got working several years for someone else, and he didn't look at it as an experience to be partnered in. He looked at it as an experience to get all sorts of experience that he could use to start his own practice, and he did. I knew another guy that worked for White and Case, which is a very prestigious law firm in the Los Angeles office. And by the time he got to be a third or fourth year, he'd had enough, even though he was very successful and started his own practice. So, when you're working for a law firm, you have to really be out there, being perceived as someone doing, best you can, better than other people, billing the most hours, all these different things. And you have to keep score against other people. When you start your own practice, you often, don't do as well. And it can become very, very difficult how you have to be perceived according to others. You will be negatively, if you interview with the law firm and you ask for bonuses and things, you're probably not going to be hired. The law firm is controlling that, and they want to have the say in how that works. They don't necessarily, people do join firms for these reasons, but they want you to basically accept what they're giving without question and be happy with it. I knew a guy that was a partner in a major U.S. law firm in San Francisco, but not a big office, like maybe 15 people up in that office. And he was kind of the head partner in the firm. And he gave out bonuses to people there, and they weren't what they expected. They were very upset, very generous, and then was very, very mad. And was like, I'm going to let these people go that were mad about their bonuses. It's just absolutely insane. So, when you start your own practice, you're in charge of your bonuses. You're in charge of how much you're in charge of. You don't have other people mad at you. You're not accountable to other people, and you have the ability to become much more successful and often happier than you would be if you were working for other people. Many people start their own practice because they have no choice. So I would say probably 50% of the people that start their own practices often do so because they have no choice. They have to do that. And if they have to do that, that just means no one will hire them. And that's not a bad thing. That's often just a sign that, if you're not getting jobs, then people aren't hiring you. And I teach people how to get jobs, but if people aren't hiring you, then maybe it would be a really good idea for you to start your own practice, because that's a sign that you're going to have to make it on your own. And many people can't get jobs. Again, like I said, if you didn't go to a great law school and you didn't do well there, you may have a very difficult time finding a job. If you are in a market where there's not a lot of jobs, you may have a difficult time finding a job. If there's a big slowdown in the market and people in your practice area aren't getting hired, it may be difficult to find a job. So like right now, for example, there's a big slowdown in real estate and corporate related work. So if you lose your job in those practice areas, there are far more people trying to get those jobs than there are those jobs. So unless you're the best person trying to get those jobs, you're often going to have an extremely difficult time getting a job. So what do you do in that situation? Like, what do you do? And so a lot of people need to start their own practices. There's these huge groups of people every year that don't get jobs, and you may graduate from New York Law School in New York and not do well there and have a hard time getting a job in New York. Or the big one, of course, is LLMs. Like people go to school in the US to get an LLM, and then they're foreign and no one will hire them. Well, all they try to do most of the time is get jobs in big firms and want to hire them, instead of realizing that once they pass the bar in New York or California, wherever they are, they can open their own practice. And so if you can't get a job, or if there's not enough jobs in the market you're in, or all these things that can limit you, then you can start your own practice. Who cares? I know a woman, like I said earlier, this immigration attorney, probably one of the most successful and well-known in the country. No one would hire her when she graduated, but she used her experience. She was Canadian and had come over to the US and go to law school and immigrate and all these things and choose that experience to launch your own practice. And, so you may not be able to get a job often because sometimes you may be in a small area, like a not large area of the country where there's just not a lot of jobs, but there may not be a lot of law firms or companies you can work for or government offices. And you're just finding yourself in this area where no one is hiring. And so what do you do? Do you become a contract attorney or what do you do? Like a lot of people decide just to get work, become contract attorneys or staff attorneys, and often not necessary. Like why would you do something where you're going to be limited in your income and responsibility and everything when you can open your own practice? And people in remote areas of the country, like they graduate and they go back home and that's their only choice and it works. But you may be in an area where you can't get a job. You may have gone to a law school that you don't, it's not good, or gone to a great law school and have, sometimes people go to great law schools and there's bad interviewers and they don't have the skills, or they don't do well at the law school, or they have, I don't know, there's all sorts of things. But, if you didn't go to a great law school and you get a job, it's not going to pay a lot, or you can't get a job, but you don't have, you're not someone that has, you may not have done very, very well in your LSATs, which fine. That does mean to some extent that you don't have the same ability to process legal problems. I mean, than you would other things. So I'll just give you an example. Like I took the LSAT, I studied for months and months and months, and never got anywhere near the score that I wanted to get to go to Yale or Stanford or something. I mean, I got into Virginia, which I guess is ranked, top 10 or 5, I don't know, but I got into a good law school, but I didn't have that highest level of aptitude. So I didn't do as well in law school as I probably could have compared to people. But all I'm saying is, if you may have gotten the bottom 20% in the LSATs, you may have gone to a bad law school and not gotten in the bottom 20% there, and you're not getting momentum with employers. Well, there are lots of practice areas where this particular skill of taking tests and things and that aptitude isn't really necessary. Like you can be, like I said earlier, personal injury attorney, you can be an immigration attorney, you do all these things where your skills processing all this sort of information take a back seat to your ability to market things. And those are the people often that do the best. So, if you didn't go to a great law school or you didn't do as well as you want in law school, you still have lots of opportunities. Sometimes there are attorneys, and I'm not trying to be rude here, but there are attorneys that may have disabilities. I don't know what those disabilities would be, but there's all sorts of disabilities. There could be psychiatric problems, or it could be, you're in a wheelchair. I don't know, but I'm not. And again, I'm not. But you could have disabilities. Sometimes you may have done something wrong. I don't know yet. If you can get. I've seen people become attorneys that have criminal records, like felonies, and then no one's going to hire them. But they still have managed to get admitted to the bar. You could have something negative in your background. I don't know what it is. Like sometimes you search for people's names and all this bad stuff comes up. But I know people that have their own practices. One person who's blind, and sometimes you may be involved in a scandal. Like I know people that have gone through horrible divorces and their wives made all these accusations, and that it's in the paper and things, and no one's going to hire them. So regardless, you can become a solo practitioner and leave a lot of that stuff behind. You may be too young. I know a guy that graduated from law school, that graduated from Berkeley at the age of 19. He was incredibly smart. He also got into Harvard, but he wanted to get away to the West Coast, didn't like his parents, and he couldn't get a job. I actually hired him to work for me, but when our company slowed down, I let him go, and then he, instead of going to a new firm or anything, he just decided to take all the money he made and travel. But I've seen attorneys that were in their 80s and were unable to get jobs. I mean, literally, there are people that old that unable to get jobs. And you can practice law into your 90s if you have your own practice. I did my first divorce, and divorced twice, which is not good. But my first divorce, I hired an attorney to help me with my divorce, who was near my home in Pasadena. And when I hired him to help me, it was basically doing a lot of paperwork. He was in his late 80s, I think, and I couldn't believe it. I mean, he was still practicing. He had his own practice. And I'm just doing it with a secretary. And so after the divorce, I kept driving by his office, and it must have been 7 or 8 years that I was driving by, and his sign was still up, and there were still cars there. And he had a small office building with just him. It was very small, and so I took that to mean that he was practicing well into his 90s. I had an attorney that I was working for that was in his late 80s and had a practice doing trust and estates law. And he was in Orange County, and he hired me because he was getting old and wanted to sell his practice to another law firm. And he approached me, so I went out and met with him and discussed it. And he was in his late 80s, and eventually I gave him what he needed to merge his practice into a larger law firm. But he practiced for another 5 years, and I guess he was 93. And one day he was in his house after church and sat down in a chair and then I guess died. But again, you can practice in your own firm forever. Sometimes, there are people, and I'm not, that have substance abuse problems, very common. Some people are alcoholics or have drug problems. And I would say to some extent, those are disabilities. It doesn't mean they can't function and practice law that way, but they just are unable to be at the office early or whatever it is, and it impacts their ability. And I know one alcoholic guy that he goes to a new firm, and then his alcohol impacts his ability to stay there, and then he just kind of keeps moving around to firms after this alcoholism comes out. But it's sad, but that particular person could have his own practice and maybe manage things that way. Some people are just sort of misfits. I knew one guy that was very smart. He graduated from Davis Law School. I think, I don't know if maybe it was Davis, but first in his class. And he got to a law firm, and he started growing his hair down to his buttocks, and he refused to cut his hair. He just wouldn't do it. It's like who I am. And then he lost his job in a big firm, and would go out in these interviews, and no one would hire him because of his long hair. And I know it sounds crazy, but no one was interested in hiring him because he had long hair. That would probably, depending on what he did, wouldn't be an issue if he decided his own practice. Different people are just kind of misfits. They don't fit in. They don't fit in with others. And if you're like that kind of person, you can also open your own practice. I mean, you have all these options. You may not just work well in groups. You may be introverted, or you may just not get along with others. They may annoy you. Who knows? But you just get to firms and you don't do well. Some people just have weird schedules that they work more efficiently at night than during the day, or they mothers that need to be home more than and they have a hard time. So sometimes you're just in a position where it's your only option because of who you are. And if you're that type of person, then starting your own practice can be a very good move. Sometimes people start their own practice because they don't know what else to do. So sometimes people just are aimless. They don't know exactly what they want to do, but sometimes it works out. If you decide you don't want to work in a law firm or another practice setting, and you're confused about your career path, then that's often a good idea. You can think, okay, I don't know what I want to do, and necessarily you can start your own practice. Is not the best way to do it, but you can start your own practice and kind of see what happens. You advertise, clients will come in. I knew one attorney that was laid off from a major law firm, and all of a sudden, people from his former firm started giving him work to do that they didn't want to do themselves, and he was able to start a successful firm that way. So there's kind of all these things with this stuff. There's all these reasons that people may start their own practices, and they end up actually becoming successful. So a lot of attorneys, just don't know how to find a position. Sometimes it's very common for older attorneys that are kind of pushed out of law firms or senior. Maybe they went in-house and they decide to start their own practice. I started to talk to one guy yesterday that started his career. I think it was at Mayor Brown, and he worked there. He worked there for 5 years. Then he went in-house. Then he started his own practice. It became very, very successful. And then he went back to Mayor Brown as a contract partner after doing that for several years, and it just became very successful. And now he's going back out in his own. So all these things can happen, and you really, if you do start your own practice, you probably need to think through it a little bit. Meaning, you want to have reasons for doing so, but if you have those legitimate reasons, it can really help you. And if you really want to have more compelling reasons than not knowing what else to do. I mean, I would suggest, and this is just my opinion, but I think I'm right. When you start your own practice, you should really go all in, and you should be convinced to stick with it, be persistent, to do all these sort of personal development things that are going to make you successful. So you do want to go in kind of with the right attitude when you do it. You need to have persistence. You need to realize that things aren't always going to work out. What do I mean by that? I mean that you can bring in clients, and the clients pay you. It can be very difficult. It's not easy getting paid by clients or collecting money. It's just all not that great. But if you are fully committed and you learn your lessons along the way, you can do it. But I just want to be very clear that going in and starting your own practice should not be something that is easy, that you think you're going to just succeed just by doing it. I mean, you need to be like 100%. And a lot of people will say, oh, I'm going to start my own practice, but I'm going to do something else. And until I get successful, I'm going to do this and that, and I'm going to see how it works out. And I will just tell you, like any business you start, you need to really be all in. You need to believe in yourself, and you need to do the absolute best you can when you start it, and you need to give it all you have, because if you give it all you have, you'll succeed. Most people don't succeed because they don't give it all they have. And there's a kind of famous quote. Elon Musk talks a lot about it, but he says, when you start any business, you have a certain amount of hours each day. Some people will use all those hours for their work. Other people will not, but the person who works twice as hard is going to be twice as successful as the person that only works half as hard. So just giving it all you have, learning, being committed is important. So here are some of the drawbacks of having your own practice. And these are serious drawbacks, and they're things you need to consider if you're interested in opening your own practice. But the first thing is, when you're a solo practitioner, you're going to need to get your own work. So that's a big deal. I mean, you need to be able to know, how am I going to get work? And that's a very, very important thing. You need to, when you're thinking about even what type of practice area to open your practice in, what practice area you're going to do, what's the location going to be? How are you going to market your services? Who do you know? What can you learn about marketing? You can learn about AdWords. You can learn about hosting events. If you want to, for people host dinners and things where they talk to older people about their trust in the state's work. I mean, this is something that you need to be able to do. Now, I told you I was able to do it quite easily. Maybe that's because of the time and place, but I made the decisions about trying to advertise in the small market. I made decisions about all these sorts of things that enabled me to get business and work. And I had made contacts before I did it to start my own work. But you need to really understand that you're going to need to figure out how to bring your own work in. It's very, very important, because if you don't understand how to do that, then you're not going to succeed. But you may start out small and grow, and that's really what you do. But you need to figure out how to bring in work. Now, how do you bring in work compared to other people? You do things like, you do a practice area that you're passionate about. So when you talk about it, people can see your passion or interest in it. You have to be interested in the practice area. If you're interested in it, everything's going to kind of come together, because you're going to have people that are interested in stuff are going to be much more effective than people that are not. I mean, you should not open your own practice feeling sorry for yourself. You have to do different types of work, but you have to really have a good idea of how to bring in your own work and figure that out. And it's not easy. I mean, you're definitely, you have to figure out how to bring in work. And obviously there's tons of people to figure out how to do it. So you need to figure it out too. And how do you do it? It's no different than how do you meet a significant other. And you learn how to be places where you're going to meet people. You go to bars or functions. Maybe you go on apps and meet people. I mean, people that want to meet a significant other figure it out. And It's the same thing with starting your own practice. You figure it out, but you learn about it. You have to study marketing. You have to read books about marketing. You have to really be really committed to this so you can attract the work and market in other ways that other people aren't. There's all sorts of resources for people that want to learn how to bring in work. There's like E-Myth for attorneys. There's books about marketing by Al Rees. There's books about sales by Dino. There's all these things that you can draw on to learn how to bring in work. You can talk to other solos and other cities and things where you're not working and figure out how they bring in their work. There's so many resources. There's courses online. There's so many things you can learn how to bring in work, but you need to draw on those resources because you're not going to figure it out all on your own. You can learn from others that have been successful, and that's going to help you. And what is bringing in work? It means you have to figure out how to advertise. You have to figure out how to get referrals from existing clients. You have to figure out how to network. You have to figure out how you're seen by maybe other attorneys that can give you work or the public. You have to figure all these things out, and you need to bring in work. I mean, it's the most important thing about having your own practice. It's because if the work dries up, then you fail. So you need to always be able to bring in work, and the work needs to not just be bringing in one client. It needs to be constantly having the phone ring with work coming in, and then if you're able to generate work, then you'll do well. I mean, a lot of times attorneys they'll get work and they'll be busy for a couple months, and then that will go away. And so if you can't do that, I mean, you need to figure out, how do I dedicate a certain portion of my day and time to bringing in work? And that means going out and meeting people. I mean, partners in large law firms that are trying to bring in work, they may go out on 2 or 3 dinners a week. I mean, they're spending all their time making sure that they're constantly having work coming in. You need to do the same thing too. You need to outwork other solo practitioners, and you may be bothered by that. You may be bothered by having to bring in your own work, and honestly, it doesn't matter. Sometimes people think, oh well, I'm not good at marketing and sales. I'm not good at this, but honestly, all these skills can be learned. You can learn how to get work. If you have bad interpersonal skills, you can improve them. All these things you should draw on to help you improve and to become a better marketer, a better person with others. You can take classes like Dale Carnegie has a great course in personal relations, how to get along with others. There's marketing courses. There's all these resources that you can draw on to become someone that's good at bringing in work. And in order to always be busy, you need to be able to generate work from potential clients. It's just how it works. You need to be able to constantly be able to get work. And a lot of times, and most of the time when the solo practice fails, it's because the person that is running it doesn't consistently do what they can to bring in work. And they don't concentrate on it. They don't believe in themselves. They have all these things. And what's nice about bringing in your own practice is it can motivate you to become a better marketer. It can motivate you to have more self-confidence in yourself. It can motivate you to do all these things that you might not do if you're working for others. So what does that mean? It means doing things like listening to Anthony Robbins, watching personal development. It means watching videos on YouTube that will get you inspired about starting your own business, running a business, marketing. It means doing things. I always recommend people read Think and Grow Rich, and you set goals and you review those goals constantly, and you do all these things to help you become a better person and a better marketer and more persuasive, and to have confidence. And I'll just say one thing that's very important. One of the most important ingredients to all this is self-confidence. You need to have self-confidence in yourself to be able to give that confidence to your client. So a client needs to come to you, and you need to be self-confident and give them the impression that you're the person that they want representing them. You have to have that self-confidence, and then you have to have the ability to relate to them and learn how to get along with different types of people. You can learn that from Anthony Robbins. You can learn that from reading Dale Carnegie books. His good one called How to Win Friends and Influence People. You can do all this stuff, but you have to constantly be improving yourself, because the more you improve yourself, the more likely it is you're going to be able to bring in work. And most attorneys in law firms are not skilled at bringing in work. That's why their careers come to an end after a certain number of years. That's why they're always dependent on others. They don't have to develop that self-confidence. They don't have to develop those interpersonal skills. They don't have to develop all these things that you would have to develop if you have your own practice. So if you're thinking about opening your own practice, I would say that the most important thing that you're selling is yourself. So you need to learn how to be that person that can sell themselves, that has that self-confidence, that people will want to work with. And that's the thing. I mean, this is what, the things I'm talking about right now are giving you the reasons to potentially start your own practice and do well at them, and do well at it. But your interpersonal skills to bring in work, and your sales ability, and how you think about the practice, what you're doing, is going to be important. And by the way, you're not just going to set up a law firm and say, I do corporate transactions for big companies. I mean, you have to think about what the practice area is that you're doing your work in. How do you bring in work? How do you write papers? How do you prospect for clients? You write papers that might get their attention about something, or build a big website that talks about what you do. But you have to really consider, when you're doing all this, like, how am I going to bring in work? How am I going to differentiate myself from other people? How am I going to do that? And sometimes starting your practice means you could start it in some sort of niche. Like I told you earlier about this woman that I know became very successful in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, starting a firm that did these software development agreements. You just have to decide, like, what am I going to commit to, and how is that going to work? I told you the story about the woman that started for a big law firm that started the practice doing software development agreements. I told you the story about the woman that started this firm doing corporate work, even though she was not a corporate attorney, marketing her services as a local attorney in Delaware to help with corporate finance and transactions. I mean, you need to figure out, like, what you're doing. And what that woman did is she just hung out her own shingle and started marketing the service of helping, just filing these corporate documents, not even really doing a lot of work, but for people, businesses in Delaware. So you have to be able to bring your own work. You have to figure it out. You have to think about it. So, what I did, like I told you earlier, is not only was I doing all the self-development stuff and goal setting and reading Anthony Robbins and other inspirational books, and Dan Kennedy for marketing, all these different things to get you enthusiastic. You have to learn, what are you going to do to bring in work? How are you going to keep your everything going? And that's very important. And by the way, even if you're not starting your own solo practice, the most important thing is always to be able to bring in work. You should always be thinking about that in the back of your head. Even if you're working for a major U.S. law firm doing some sort of niche corporate transaction, you need to figure out, how am I going to bring in work? How am I going to stay busy? And this is really the number one goal of any career, is how do I keep going? Like, how do I stay busy? Like, what do I do to keep going? And the work is the most important thing. And I can't emphasize enough becoming a better person, learning how to get along with others, having a product, meaning a service you offer that people are going to buy, where you put the service. I mean, when Burger King or some big company is thinking about opening a business, or Walmart, they want to open it in an area where they're going to succeed. So they think about the geographic area. They have a product. They want to know that what the work that they do, people are going to buy wherever they are, and they're smart about it. They don't just open a Walmart in the middle of New York City. They think that that's going to actually do a lot better in smaller markets. So they go where the work is, or where the business is. You need to think about that, and then you need to think about where your product is. I mean, a Burger King doesn't open not knowing what kind of food they're going to serve, and they don't open it in a location where they don't know if they're going to succeed or not. They think about where's the work, where's the business. And so if you're solo, you're also often going to need to hire people to hire you now, do work for you, and that doesn't help you with the work. Now, you can certainly do all of the work on your own, but most people are going to require others to help them with various tasks. They're going to need people to help them with different types of work that they're doing, whether it's being more efficient with filings and litigation and doing kind of busy work, or answer the phones, all those sorts of things. And so once you have to start hiring people, which hopefully you will if you start your own solo practice, you're going to need to learn how to manage people, and that's a whole different skill. But it's exciting to learn a new skill. You're also going to suddenly have people you have to pay. You're going to have to bring in enough work to pay them, and you're going to have to make sure you pay them before you pay yourself, and all these sorts of things. You're going to have to learn how to do that. And And then, of course, if you're starting a solo practice and you want to hire other attorneys to help you, hiring the best people to help you is going to be expensive. And so they're also often going to want to work for someone that has a brand. So you're going to be hiring people that don't have the same, have different income demands if you want. They're gonna want prestige or stability, and that you may not be able to offer them. So you're going to have to think about, what am I going to say to them? What can I offer them? All these sorts of things that when you hire other people are important. So not only are you learning self-development to get business, not only are you learning marketing to get business, not only are you having to develop self-confidence to get business, but then you're also going to have to learn how to manage people. And that's a whole different skill. A lot of firms never grow because the people operating the firms, the solo practitioners, can never manage people. They fire people. They don't get along with others. They don't know how to inspire people working for them. All these sorts of things that larger firms typically will and other firms have become experts in. And so almost kind of like the larger and older and more prestigious the firm is, the more systems they have for onboarding and bringing in new people and having goals for them and keeping them motivated, whereas other smaller with solo practitioners may not understand that. And then just some other things. I mean, when you have your own solo practice, you're going to have to find office space. You're going to have to furnish it. You're going to have to do things that don't necessarily need the billable hours. You're going to have to figure out how to get your computers and printers working, all those sorts of things that law firms do. And that is a lot of people think is busy work. And of course, as you start getting computers and as you start getting office space and things, that's going to be, and you're going to need IT help. That's all expenses you're going to have to factor in. And being alone is, for a lot of people, is not something that they like when they start their own solo practice. I mean, it's being alone is not necessarily a fun thing. I mean, you're not going to be practicing around others. You're not going to you're not going to have to rely on other people to keep you company. You're not going to have people to bounce questions off of. You're not going to be practicing with another group of people anymore. And that, for a lot of people, is not easy. I mean, I know for myself, when I work in the office, it's much more inspiring being around other people than it is working at home, because when I'm working at home, it's just me, and I don't have anybody to talk to things about. And and I don't have anybody to bounce ideas off of. And it can be lonely, no matter what people say. Being around other people actually is a good thing. I mean, others, you can gauge your performance next to them, or you can, they can motivate you when you're down, and all these sorts of things. They can keep you company. You have people to talk to. When you have your solo practice, that can be, very isolating in a lot of respects, and a lot of people don't like it. I mean, some people, instead of opening solo practices, they want to open it with someone else and have a partner. There's all sorts of other issues, but having other people around you. I mean, some law firms, it was funny, like the first firm I worked at, it was Quinn, Emmanuel, Urquhart. And so Quinn was the guy that was kind of the face of the firm and was able to inspire people and also do very good work and kind of embody all the ideals of the firm. And then Emmanuel was the guy that was very good at writing and making sure that the work that the attorneys did was really, really good, and providing standards and ways of writing, doing litigation. I was looking over them. Urquhart was the guy that was very, very nice and always out there recruiting clients and attorneys to work for the firm. So all these sort of people balanced each other out. And then you had this other guy that had some huge clients. And I mean, so that he was a later partner. And so all of these people in a law firm, when they're together, they can bounce ideas off each other, and they can become more successful when they have others that they can work with, and that will inspire them to do better and will take care of their weaknesses. So, there's different types of roles in law firms. There's people that it's called, you have your grinders, minders, and finders. So grinders are the people that do all the work, and then minders are the management that watch everybody and make sure the work's done a certain way. And then minders, grinders, and finders. Finders are the people out there doing the work. So there's these three different types of personalities that a lot of law firms are built on. And when you're a solo practitioner, you have to be a minder. You have to watch the people that work for you, and you have to be a grinder. You have to do a lot of work often, and then you have to be a finder. You have to be out there getting the work. So you have to be all these different types of people when you're working as a solo that you may not be when you're working, for example, for a law firm as a grinder. I mean, most attorneys are grinders. And then if you have these characteristics where you can see yourself being a finder and bringing in work, that's very, very good. Or you can see yourself, once you bring in work, being very good at managing the process. So, those are all things that you get that law firms are kind of built on. And when you're alone, it can be very, very difficult. Solo practitioners, like I said before, they need to be internally motivated. So you're not going to be motivated by the expectations of people that you're working with. You're going to have to come up with your own way to motivate yourself, to stay positive when things are down, to make sure that you're working enough hours to pay your bills, to meet deadlines that, if you're in a large law firm doing litigation, they're telling you the dates that all these things are due and you have to have them filed by. And there's all these things that can clocking your hours all the time and all these things that law firms do to keep you motivated. And if you're working alone, you always don't have that. So that's just, it's difficult often to stay motivated, especially when things are down. Like I have my businesses go in the recruiting space have their ups and downs because they're dependent on the market. Like how's the market doing? They're dependent on all these different factors that make it, that can be very, very difficult to do if you're working on your own. I mean, if you're working on your own, you have to keep yourself motivated. You have to believe in what you're doing. And I'll just say, when I started my recruiting practice and developed it into a successful business, I was very self-motivated. I found myself getting up at like 4:30 or 5 in the morning to work on this recruiting stuff I wasn't that motivated when I was in a law firm. I had the internal motivation. And when you start your own practice, you have to have that internal motivation. The only way you get that internal motivation is if you just tell yourself, like, I'm going to be persistent. This is what my future looks like as having my own firm, as opposed to what it is in a law firm. You should list those reasons to keep yourself motivated. It means you're in control of your income. It means you can always have a job. When you get more clients, you learn how to do it. It means that you're not dependent on others for advancement or what you're paid, and all these different things can help you. And so you have to be very, very motivated internally to do well. And this is kind of a big one, and I'll just get into it real briefly. But when you have your own practice, there's no one overlooking your work. The clients don't know the quality of work you're doing. And oftentimes what happens when someone opens their own solo practice is their skills kind of deteriorate. They're not working necessarily around others that are helping them become very, very successful in what they're doing. And so, your skills are going to deteriorate. You're not going to be, unless you're taking a lot of CLE courses and stuff, you're often not going to be at the forefront of what you're doing. You're not going to have other people to bounce ideas off of. You're not going to be learning from others, and people aren't going to be looking over your work, and you're not going to be accountable to the standards that the firm sets. You're not going to be discussing cases and development with other people, and all these things are going to kind of impact the quality of your work, and you'll learn to cut corners and not do things a certain way. I couldn't believe it when this attorney I was telling you about earlier that graduated in the top 5 of his class from the University of Texas and everything. When he came to work for me, he'd never worked for anybody else, and I couldn't believe the quality of his work. He had typos and paragraphs that should have been 2 paragraphs, and all these different things that he was doing because he'd never been taught, and no one had ever questioned his work. And so he would, instead of filing formal motions, he would just file just all these different things because his work quality was never checked. And if no one's overlooking your work and so forth, then your work quality will deteriorate. If your work quality deteriorates, what that means is that you will not be doing the best work you can for clients. So you always need to realize that when you're working for a firm, you get that impact, and you need to keep your skills up. And a lot of solos don't do that. They don't keep their skills up. If they don't keep their skills up, then it can really hurt them. And this is a big one. When you're working as a solo, it just depends on your practice area, but you don't get the respect that you get when you're working for a law firm and you can use that name. So lawyers that are working for big law firms will feel
they'll be respected by other attorneys based on the name of the law firm and the people that they're working for. And that law firm will also command respect with people that you're up against in different cases or matters. And so once you have your own practice, you kind of start losing the respect that other people wouldn't necessarily have of you. And so you're respected just on your name and not others. And that respect means that larger clients are going to want a name behind them that has respect. And until you develop a law firm, if you make it larger with a big name and stuff, you're not going to get that respect. Now, I don't think that really matters for a lot of practice areas. It doesn't matter if you're a family law attorney or you're an immigration or personal injury attorney, and you can get the respect if you're doing a lot of consumer-facing work, meaning you're working for individuals. But you're certainly not going to get that respect a lot of times when you're working alone. And when you're working against larger firms, they're going to know that you don't have the same resources that larger firms have. And so, giving up that level of respect is difficult for a lot of people. A lot of people from big firms, their identity is based on where they work. So they want to be able to tell others they work at this prestigious firm. They want to get the respect in the legal community that people get when they're working for certain types of firms. And you don't necessarily get that respect when you're working on your own, unless you're doing really, really good work. But your respect has to come. It has to be internal. You have to believe in yourself and your name and all these things that you don't get from a firm. So this is it's a very big self-improvement, self-motivation, believing in yourself, self-confidence, all these things that come with a larger name. And when you're with a small firm, you're going to get pushed around often by people that have better firms. They can do more work. Their clients are bigger. They're a group of people that is able to push out better work than you can. And so a lot of solo practitioners end up getting pushed around and don't get the respect that they might necessarily get if they were working in a law firm, and they may not like that. I mean, I know that it's very hard sometimes for people that get their self-esteem and identity working for larger firms to open their own solo practice because they don't feel like it's respected. But I will tell you that you will, if you open a solo practice and you do well at it, you will respect yourself more and you believe in yourself more, and you will feel much better in the long run when you have a successful practice where you can generate your own income and so forth. And then this is a big point for a lot of people. You will often, as a solo practitioner, may not always make as much money as you would working for a larger firm. It's just not often the case. So sometimes people will make less money. So if you're at a big firm and you're making whatever, hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, it's going to be very difficult for you often to get to that level. You may work harder. You may have to do things like administrative tasks, like I talked about earlier, or you may have to settle cases with your clients. You need to make sure you're getting paid, all these sorts of things. And so, you're going to be working on smaller matters that if you're a solo practitioner, most of the time, you're going to be working for smaller clients. And those clients are going to have so much money to pay you. And sometimes they're not even going to pay you. I know one solo practitioner who was very successful, and I forget what he was doing. He was doing tax law, and very, very good tax lawyer. And he was a solo. And I remember he used to tell his son that I'm lucky sometimes, for a lot of clients to get paid 60% of what I'm billing them. So, it's when you're working for smaller clients, it's often very difficult to get paid. You don't have the respect that makes people write checks as readily as they might from the large firm. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. And also, you may end up working harder for less money depending on your practice area. So you have to take that into account. Now, I'm not talking about in the long run when you figure out how to run a business, but in the short run, when you don't know how to run a business, yes, you will often work harder for less money. And then, like I said earlier, it's very difficult many times to collect your bills. I ran a law practice in Malibu for several years. Now, it was not a real law practice in the sense that I was marketing as hard as I could and so forth. But it was a law practice, and I used it to represent our companies in various matters and things like corporate work, but also litigation and things where we had to sue people that didn't pay us and so forth. And it was much more difficult for us to get paid as a small law firm than was for large law firms. So I can remember several instances I took on and helped these guys file a lawsuit against Warner Brothers, but I didn't do it on contingency, and I had a very difficult time getting paid by them, and very difficult time. I had another family law case that I gave to a woman because the person was just kind of walking to our office, and I gave it to a woman in her office, and she didn't get paid by the client at all. And I just said, "Oh, I'm not happy with the work, and I'm going to report you to the bar," or whatever. And it was just, she would have made problems. So it's often very difficult for small law firms to get paid, and the clients that the solo practitioner may represent will often be much more budget, and they'll put off paying money. I told you about this very successful immigration attorney, and even though she has this big practice of all these attorneys, it's very difficult for her to get paid by a lot of her clients. So and so sometimes the clients won't pay you at all. And so being in this role where you're having a very difficult time collecting money that people owe you is not easy. When you're a solo practice, you're again, these are just little things to think about, but you're going to have your own medical insurance. You're going to have to figure out how to pay your healthcare expenses that might be paid by a firm, and this can be a lot of money. It's something to think about. I mean, if you have health problems and you're starting on, or you don't have health problems, you have them later, you're going to have to pay those expenses, and then solo practitioners often they borrow money. Litigators will go to litigation funding companies, or sometimes they'll rely on lines of credit. The lines of credit can be very expensive, and we have lines of credit at our company, and I mean they're very expensive. It's not like you're paying 5% or anything. I mean, if somebody's giving you money, then they're going to want money in return. And solo practitioners, when money doesn't come in, and this is something to think about. They'll often be too far in over their heads and too much debt, and it's very difficult to operate. And then they'll default on credit cards, you get bad credit ratings and all these things. So you need to think about that. And there's a certain time, by the way, when you want to start your solo practice. So you either want to start at some times when you know you have enough money in the bank, or when you don't have a lot of expenses. And again, to give you some advice from Elon Musk, he says that the best time to start a business is when you're young and you don't have families and all these expenses that you will have later in your life. So that can be very difficult if you're older and you have a lot of expenses. I mean, you have large mortgages and a spouse and kids and things. So you have to decide kind of about the timing, and then you also need to be able to build a reputation. So to generate business, like, people need to be speaking positively about you. The other attorneys a lot of attorneys that have their solo practice get all of their business from other attorneys. So you have to get a reputation. People have to know who you are. Solo practitioners will join boards, and they'll do all these things to be seen, and they have to have a reputation. And you could be working in a law firm and you wouldn't necessarily need to have a reputation. Like, you can work in a law firm almost indefinitely if you're working for other partners and things, and become an income partner and then maybe counselor. And you don't need to develop this great reputation that a solo would often need to have in order to succeed. So you need to think about, that a law firm attorney would, or someone that's working in-house. So having a good reputation is helpful. And then sometimes, again, like, people may not like having partners. Sometimes people will get a partner, and then when they get a partner, that has all sorts of other problems to deal with. There'll be fights over money. There'll be fights over the direction of the firm. There could be lawsuits. All these things often happen. One partner wants to take money out of the business. The other wants to use it for development and things. So you'll have all these disagreements that can come up. Now, partnerships obviously work. Otherwise, there wouldn't be all these law firms out there. But it can be very, very hard. And you have to be very, very careful about who you choose to be your partner. I remember when I was first year attorney, second year attorney, third year attorney, I had all these attorneys in these different law firms wanting to be my partner. And they wanted to be my partner, I think, because they saw how hard I worked. They saw I was bringing business. They saw that I had a business mind, because I had businesses before then. But all these people wanted to be my partners. And I never wanted a partner, because I was like, I don't think anybody's going to work as hard or be as dedicated or really want this more than I do. And I think even in the business I'm in now, people want to be my partner. And in retrospect, maybe it would have been a good idea, but I think not having a partner gave me financial freedom and all these things that I might not have had if I had to be accountable to a partner and buy out their interest if they didn't want to work with me or I wanted to do things alone. So all that's very important to think about. So when's the best time to start your solo practice? And, I realize we're going into quite a bit of detail here, and I'm doing this because I want everyone to really get a good education and foundation in this, because you need to understand this business because this decision, because it's going to impact potentially the entire course of your life. And so you need to decide when is the best time to start your own solo practice. And I think the best time to start your own practice is first you need to start thinking about it. So right now in this presentation, I've given you a lot to think about. And I think that the stuff I'm giving you to think about is very important. But people that start their own solo practices, often the best time to start it is when you can't necessarily take working in a law firm any longer. Like it's not for you. And the idea of having your own practice is something that really appeals to you. Like you're thinking about it and you're watching things like this and you're maybe reading books. And so it's important to you. But I will just say to you, and this is true, when you're younger, meaning you're a couple years out of law school or right out of law school or 5 or 7 years or whatever it is, you're going to need to have the energy to do this. And it's for that reason that a lot of times people, when they start getting, there's retirement communities or 55 plus. And once someone reaches the age of 55, they're considered kind of near the retirement age. It's kind of a weird thing to say, but it's true. So you're 55 years old and you've kind of lost the energy in terms of the way the world thinks about you. And you need to have that energy to get this thing off the ground. You need to be at a point where you have all this passion and you're not, the passion is no longer there. And it's for that reason, a lot of times that most law firms are most interested in hiring younger people, because those younger people have all this energy to put in a law firm that older attorneys just don't sometimes. But when you think about having your own practice is when you realize you don't want to work for a law firm, you don't want to work for the government or wherever you're working, and it becomes something you're passionate about, and that you start thinking about, like you're thinking about this now. But that's probably, once you've thought about it and let it, thought about it a while and kind of let it seep into your self-conscious and all these things, that becomes a good time to start thinking probably about opening your own solo practice. When you have the passion or interest in it, when you don't, that's a problem. So, if you don't have it, then it's not a good time. If you still don't feel confident in your practice area and you feel like you need to be someplace longer to do it, if you need to save money to do it, if you don't feel ready. But I will tell you, like anything, like if this is the kind of thing that you're just gonna like simmer on for a long time and never reach and not realize that you do not have the confidence in yourself to do it, or you keep coming up with reasons not to do it, at some point you're going to need to take a leap of faith and do it. So you need to realize that you just can't let this idea simmer forever. You have to make definite plans and start thinking about when and how you're going to do it. And that's some of the most powerful advice I can give you, is that you're just going to need to take the leap of faith. And sometimes people do it when they get fired or whatever. Or in my case, what I did is I decided to start my solo practice, like I think it was on January 1st after I'd gotten my bonus from my law firm. And I remember just waiting because it was going to be a big bonus of like $20,000. And another attorney and I think at that point in time, you had to call the bank and just listen to a recording and press some buttons and see if the bonus came in. And I think our bonuses were paid like, I don't know, like December 18th or something. So this other attorney and I were calling the bank and to confirm that the bonus hit, because we were just nervous about it. When I got my bonus, I was like, okay, I'm going to start my own practice. And that's how I reached the decision. But, when you're working in a firm, the good thing is that I would say that to develop those legal skills I'm talking about to be a really good attorney, it often takes about 5 years. I mean, you need to have someone else giving you the work a lot of times before, if you're in a large or medium-sized firm, before you really learn your practice areas. You don't often, if you're planning on starting your practice area, starting a firm, the practice area you're in, or something tangentially related. So I would say family laws related to litigation. You could say that tax or corporate could give you the skills to be good at trust in estates. you want to stay at least for 4 or 5 years till you get a foundation of like the way to think about the law and issues. And so I would, this is a point of making a lot of webinars, but your first 5 years of practice, if somebody's paying you, that's incredible because you're getting trained in the practice area, and it's not something you learn at school. So if you are working in a law firm, you don't need to start your own practice right away when you graduate from law school. There's no forces making you do it, or you have a job and it's stable. Get that experience and training for 5 years or so before you start your own practice. And you may feel confident you can do it at 3 or 4. And if you feel like you've gotten all the skills that the law firm can give you at that time, that's good. But just get that training. You want to become a good attorney. And really, like I told you before, an attorney that just gets out of law school is often not trained in their practice here and has to pick it up on their own. And that's not always, the most efficient thing. So you want to know how to do really good work often before you go on your own. So the next thing I'm going to talk about, and this is very, very important. This is something that, I commend everybody. Very surprised to me, not very surprised, but I mean, there were literally within like 1 or 2 people that started this webinar, hundreds that are still here. So I'm very glad that people seem to be learning a lot there, and you are too. But this is a very, very important thing to understand is what practice areas are the best to start as a solo practitioner. And this is actually a pretty simple question to answer, but I'll just, but I'll go into it and a lot of, as much detail as I can right here. So you have to have some sort of niche practice area. So I've seen people develop work related to corporate that they're able to start their own practice. I've seen different people do different practice areas related to what they were doing in a law firm. But in most cases, if there's kind of 2 types of work. There's transactional work, which is real estate, corporate, those sorts of things, tax. And then there's non-transactional work, which is like litigation, different types of litigation. And so you need to understand, what your practice area is. Patent attorneys are often very successful starting other solo practices doing patent law, but you want to do a practice area that's kind of related to what you do. And then, but even a corporate attorney, like that's, are you going to get work from large companies if you're a corporate attorney, have your own practice? Probably not. But do you have a niche that companies or law firms would hire you to do? Maybe. But you have to figure out what your practice area is going to be and what type of law firms are most likely to hire you. Now, there are some exceptions to that. So you can open a general practice, which is very common, especially in smaller markets. You can open a general practice where you're doing trust estates, personal injury, all these different things. But you typically want to do within your practice areas that you're not going to be competing with, for example, large law firms. So large law firms or even small and mid-sized firms that are doing one practice area, it's going to be very difficult to compete with them because they kind of have most company, if you're in that practice area where there's a lot of money going to the firms, it's often going to be very difficult. So niche skills, but one of the most important things I would say to you in terms of your practice area and when you decide is, you're probably going to have to do something that's consumer facing, meaning in most cases that something where individuals are paying you for their services as opposed to getting paid by companies and that sort of thing. So what does that mean? It means that individuals will do trust in estates, will do family law, will do disputes with neighbors and things, they'll do personal injury, they'll do, there's all these practice areas that you can go into where you're working for people as opposed to companies. And that's what most solo practitioners have to do. So if you're doing litigation, you might think about family law. Real estate attorneys, sure, you can find small developers and things to do work for. But for the most cases, it's going to be related to working for individuals. And so, just having a specialization is often very important. And why is that important, especially in large geographic areas? It's because if you had some sort of health issue, like say you had cancer, you would want to go see a cancer doctor. If you had a problem with your foot, you want to go see a podiatrist or whatever. I don't know what foot doctors call it. If you had a problem with your gut, you want to see a certain type of doctor. If you had a problem with your eyes, you want to see a certain type of doctor. So that's how people think. That's how consumers think. That's how businesses think. They all want to hire someone that's a specialist in something. So large geographic areas where there's a lot of competition, you typically are better off being a specialist. And smaller geographic areas without as much competition, you don't always need to specialize. You can do a lot of different things, but you very rarely see, for example, a personal injury firm also doing corporate and trust estates. I mean, they do personal injury, that's it. So it's the same thing with you. And when I consider being a solo practitioner, for example, I thought about what I would specialize in, how I would get lots of business. And, so I thought about family law. I thought about DUIs. I thought about commercial litigation. I was representing companies that were sued for these stupid environmental violations by solo practitioners. So I thought about all these different practices. I drew on what I knew from the work I've been doing as a attorney, like learning about these environmental violations. I thought about practice areas that were related to, that I would enjoy in things. And what was interested, I wasn't interested in these practice areas, but when I put out these advertisements in these kind of smaller markets, San Marino, California, and the phone book and everything, that's exactly what I got. I got family law cases, and I actually got a big one. It's like, at the time, it was like the dean of Pepperdine. It was crazy. I just walked in, called my office, and then I got a drunk driving case, which was kind of interesting because the guy family was very powerful, and he had alcohol and crystal meth and all these things, and it would have been a big case. I got, different types of business that just kind of came in, and so I would say I was a generalist, but I just wasn't interested in it, and that's why I stopped doing it. But you should try to do something that you're interested in. I remember these family law cases, right? It was just incredibly sad. I was like, this is just downer, and I saw the attorneys on the other side, just how it kind of turned into this thing where everyone was going to milk each other for money. And then the case itself was very sad. It was like this man that spent years like staying in another room in his house while his wife and her mother and they were always talking badly about him. It was really scary. But you have to be interested in the practice area. So if you like the kind of drama that I'm talking about in family law, maybe that's interesting to you, but it wasn't to me. Or if you like representing people accused of DUI, maybe that's not for you. But all these practice areas can be very, very, you can do very, very well. And you should, think about like what kind of money is going to make me happy, or what type of work is going to make me happy. So the practice area you choose is very important. It may not be a practice area that you're currently doing, but it's always a good idea to think about what sort of practice area it's going to keep the money coming in, and what are you most interested in, what can you see yourself promoting, and what kind of work can you see yourself doing. So I think from my standpoint and everything I've said today, that for most attorneys, the biggest challenge you're going to have is just the fact that it's going to require different skills and than working in a law firm. You're running your own business, all these things to think about: being self-motivated, having self-esteem, understanding the work you're going to go into, where you're going to work, how you're going to work, motivation. All these things are important. I think that I would just say to you that a lot of businesses will tell you in any type of area, they'll say, the most important thing is marketing. And marketing is very important, because if you don't market, work's not going to come in. If you don't successfully market, you're going to be kind of in this situation where you're not going to have work to do. So you have to understand marketing, how you're going to get work, because that's really the most important thing. And then you have to believe in yourself, and then you have to want to do it. You have to be strong enough to take the work. And I've seen, many solo practitioners, ones that I've placed. I mean, I had one not too long ago. He had a $3 million dollar book of business. He was, he had other attorneys working for him. I believe he was making over $1 million a year. But she wanted to go to a law firm because the law firm would do all these things, like would hire and fire people, give her the resources, it would enable her to do what she was doing and have more freedom to do the work, not worrying about other things, even though she was making a good amount of money. And just to think about, why would you want to work for a law firm? Why would you, as a solo? I mean, you have people to collect on your bills, office space, and all these things that give you marketing. They offer a market or help you support it. And they'll hire people for you, and they'll hire the right people, and they'll fire and give you the brand. And so law firms provide all these things that you may not get as a solo. And, but when you work for a law firm, the big thing to kind of understand is that law firm is your boss. You're always going to be working for someone else. If you're working on your own, a client, I guess, is your clients are your boss. But a law firm really can, if things don't work out, you can kind of be left on your own. I told you about the partner earlier with Rick and his jeans that lost his job in a kind of a small market, got blackballed. I mean, these kind of things will happen. And again, I talked about the affair earlier and all these things. So anytime you work for a law firm, you need to realize that there's all these bad things that can happen to you. And there's all these people that are policing your behavior, and you're working with other partners, and you're competitive with them, all these sorts of things that the power to destroy you that may not necessarily come up, of course, when you're working on your own. And it's for that reason that a lot of people prefer their own practice. But again, I want to make a quick point that you need to understand as well. If you have your own law firm, then you're going to be really dependent. You're going to be limited oftentimes by how large the clients you can bring in, and the work you can do, collections and all those sorts of things. So it's not easy, but you can do it, and a lot of people do it. And because you have to just learn about all these things, marketing and all these things that are going to help you in the long run, and will help you. You'll be able to achieve often so much more than you could working for other people. And the stories that I like that I told at the beginning of this are just people that went to these top law schools and worked at these top law firms and started their own firms and literally are not doing as well as people that even didn't go to as good a law schools, but understand marketing, are more passionate about what they're doing. So all this stuff just, is hugely important to think about. And I think, I've told you a lot today about your own practice, but you're going to know really if it's for you. And hopefully I've given you enough motivation and told you about the roadblocks and things that could make it good or bad for you, that will help you make the right decision. So I'm going to take questions in just a moment. What types of cases are most viable for solo attorney to focus on initially? I have a generalist background, but want to be more strategic if I open my practice. How should I evaluate which practice areas are best for an attorney to start now, especially in a competitive market? Okay, so when you talk about cases that you're going to take, the easiest cases to take as a solo practitioner are really going to be things that are consumer oriented, or will allow you to file lawsuits against companies or whatever, or employment. So I would say employment is an easy one, either plaintiff or defense. As a defense attorney, you can represent small companies or businesses that are sued, and then as a sued, or you can sue people that have issues. In those kind of cases, sue behalf of people. Those types of cases are very common. Those are easy to do, and you can bring those in kind of all day. So employment's one type of practice area that would be where you could do cases. Then of course you have personal injury, which is an easy one. I know Quinn Emanuel actually started off calling companies. This was John Quinn, looking for small cases from companies to do their employment work, and then he would build up to larger and larger companies. And then after doing employment defense, said, "Hey, I've done such a good job for you. Would you hire me to do work on your commercial litigation?" So typically, you want to start somewhere small, meaning you can start an employment, but you want to think about cases that are easy to get. Personal injury: if someone's injured, they want to use you or some sort of injury. You can do that. You can do another big one is like family law. That's taking cases. Those cases are fairly easy to bring in. And let me just pull something up here. Give me a second here. Just share my screen in a second. Just here in search. Okay, so what are some of the practice areas? Let me just share my screen here that are good when you're looking at different types of cases. So these are some practice areas right here. I'll kind of show you some practice areas where anybody can kind of get in there and start taking cases as a solo. One is, of course, consumer bankruptcy. I had one woman that was working for me that I was training, and then she left and started her own consumer bankruptcy firm. Then you have education. I know one guy that developed this expertise. It was crazy. It was very interesting. He started off, graduated from law school and had some software company that helped people type their exams and locked up their computer or something during them. And that company had all these issues. And then he went to sell insurance and was successful at that. I think he graduated from NYU. He's kind of a really smart guy. And then I saw him, I met him maybe in 2007. And then I was in a secondhand furniture store with my girlfriend, like in 2019 or 20. And he was in there at the same time. I was like, what are you doing? And he did this thing where he was representing individuals that were suing schools for accommodations. And it was kind of this interesting practice area where when he was suing, the schools, I think, would pay his fees or something. I don't know what it was, became very, very successful. So there's kind of all these niches that you can find. Education's one of them. Sometimes people will do entertainment. That's a pretty hard one to do cases in. Environmental, you can develop an expertise suing on small environmental violations. So like in California, there was a thing called Proposition 65 that basically said you have to have warnings in stores and things on products that cause cancer. And this guy developed this huge expertise suing people doing that. Family law is another big one. You can get cases on that. People are always getting divorced. You can always open a general practice doing litigation, I guess, law, government, if there's anything there. There's that. I guess that's not a big one. Healthcare, you can be someone that does medical malpractice plaintiffs. That's another big one. So you can do that as a practice area. You can do plaintiffs insurance, where you're suing people for auto accidents and things. That's another big case, big way. Like I said, you can do litigation, suing people, or you can do defending small employers. That's another big one. I mean, just showing you there's so many freaking practice areas and things that you could do. You could do, like I said, employment law. I told you about that. You can do ADA compliance. You can do class actions sometimes if you are confident, but I think that would probably be pretty difficult to do as a solo. You can do construction litigation. You can sue people for construction defect issues. You can do, let's see what else here, false claims. That's pretty difficult when you do as a solo. You can do, like I said, insurance plaintiffs or trucking and auto plaintiffs. You can do, let's see here, medical mal. I told you about that as a plaintiff. You can do personal injury. There's all sorts of personal injury. You can do product liability plaintiffs. That's a good one. Asbestos plaintiffs is another good one. You can do real estate litigation, doing defending real estate developers that are small or suing on behalf of its plaintiffs and litigation related to that. You can do under tax. You can do, well, there's different type of tax. There's a tax controversy, which I'll show you about in a little bit. You can do trust and estates litigation. That's not an easy one. The other one you can do too is you can do criminal defense. That's always an easy one to get cases in a lot of times. And then real estate foreclosure, it's municipal law. It's probably a little bit difficult. About real estate tax, you can do tax controversy. That maybe not. Oh yeah, controversy. You get tax controversy. All that means is people that have IRS problems. That's a whole practice area that a lot of people specialize in and do well. And then you can do workers' compensation on behalf of claimants. So there are a heck of a lot of practice areas that you can go into as a solo, lots and lots of them. So I think, realizing how much potential there is as a solo, how many practice areas you can go into, and some of these may appeal to you more than others, but I just, want to show you just how many freaking practice areas there are that you can go into. It's just insane. So those are how you get cases. Typically, the cases you're going to get are going to be as plaintiffs or, smaller consumer-facing practice areas like family law. But I would say, it's going to be much more difficult to bring in, like, for example, commercial litigation representing businesses that are sued, because most of the time they're going to want larger firms representing them. But certainly you can do it also for small companies when you get started as well. Okay, let's see here. Next question. This was a good question, by the way, the solo, like what kind of cases you should take. Is it realistic to expect steady growth in opening solo practice? I've read that many solo practitioners struggle in the early years and are concerned about financial stability. what are realistic growth timelines, and how can I assess whether my practice is on the right track after the first year or two? Okay, well, like I said earlier, there's always going to be practice areas and things that you can do that are going to have more safety than others. So, when you're talking about, is my practice area going to be on the right track for the first year or two? There are practice areas where it's not, where you can often develop business that it's really not as difficult as you would think to do it. And I'll just share with you some practice areas that I like, that I think where you can often have a lot more financial stability than you may realize. One of the ones that I've seen a lot of people go into is family law. You should, if you have a family law practice, you can open it in smaller markets, start a website, and often do very, very well. Same thing with personal injury in smaller markets, but in a lot of the larger markets, people are going to go with the people that have billboards and all that kind of stuff. The other practice area I like for new attorneys is anytime you take on plaintiffs related work, you have to worry about winning, and you have to worry about settlements you get. It's not easy oftentimes with any type of personal injury, because you're not going to get that sort of financial stability. So, I often recommend that, when you're starting, you try to balance what you're doing with how realistic it is that you're going to have ongoing income. A practice area that I've seen a lot of people succeed in is trust in estates, because people always need that type of work. Right now, there is just tremendous demand for all types of trust in estates attorneys all over the country, but you can very easily open your own practice doing trust in estates, and it's not that difficult. To be successful, you do things like you can host dinners and for older people. You can have a really good website that talks about trust in estates and the trust in estates work you do, and you can put that in an area where there's not a lot of people, and you can do keywords and all this stuff, and that's a very good practice here. I really like a lot of these consumer facing practice areas. Some of them are more difficult than others. So immigration, a lot of times, you can develop a good business doing that, but it can take some time, but you can become an expert in it. A lot of times the most successful immigration attorneys are doing work that's in kind of a niche, so related to their ethnicity. So I've seen people that are from India or Indian open immigration firms catering to Indians. I saw one woman who was a former professional athlete develop one immigration practice focused on athletes coming to the U.S. All these sorts of things you can do to help with immigration. But obviously, if you think about it, with all the immigration occurring in the United States, this is a very, very interesting practice area to think about as well. So typically, when you choose any practice area where you're worried about long-term success, you need to figure out the two things. Like, you can't just start a practice area like doing personal injury oftentimes without some money to support you. So you often want to think, how can I supplement the work that I'm doing in my practice area with work that I know I'm going to get paid for. So, example, consumer bankruptcy, like if you're getting consumers to pay you to do bankruptcies, like that would be consistent income. But you need to always be aware of, just think in the back of your mind, like, what can I do to generate ongoing income as opposed to potential future income. So it was interesting. I remember when I was in law school, I wrote a book about personal injury attorneys. It was never published or anything, but I wrote this book, and I went around the country kind of interviewing people. And when I would go into smaller markets, I would find that if you were, like, I remember in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, I interviewed this guy, and he had a general practice where he did trust in estates, whatever, real estate, and all, or for small companies, but that brought in steady income. But the most of his income he actually made for personal injury work, but he got personal injury cases, which I thought was very interesting. So if you're you can often start your career doing some generalist type work, could be family law and different types of things for a smaller market, and then that will give you financial stability to start doing other things. So like the guy in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, probably should have been putting up billboards and all this stuff for a personal injury. Probably did a lot better because that's where most of his money was coming from. But it's just kind of interesting how that works. Okay, that's the next question. I'm sorry I don't have more time for questions today, but this has been going on a while, so I think we're doing it. Okay, so next question. What are the most common mistakes attorneys make when transitioning from a law firm to solo practice? I'd like to avoid the potential for pitfalls, especially managing the business aspects and client expectations. How can I prepare myself to navigate these challenges? and a perfect career that's optimal for making the switch. Okay, well, there's a lot of pitfalls that you want to avoid that I've talked about so far, I think, in this webinar, but I'll talk about a few more. One of the biggest ones is not being prepared, either psychologically or personally. So you need to basically prepare yourself for that. You need to understand you're going to have persistence and all these sorts of things when you go into it. But I think, when you talk about the optimal time to make the switch, I think you'll know when you're ready. You'll be ready to do it. You'll feel confidence in doing it, and you'll be kind of ready. And by the time I did it, I've been thinking about opening my own practice for at least a couple of years, and realized that was the career path I wanted to be on, even though I ultimately chose not to when I learned about recruiting. But the ultimate time is really when you realize it. You realize it's something you want to do. I said earlier that I think it's a good idea to get at least 5 years of experience before you do anything. A lot of times partners in law firms will leave and start their own practice with their clients, but typically you want to do it when you feel like you're ready. One thing that I would say, a couple points, and one point I just want to make to everyone, as I talked about opening your solo practice, the hardest part is getting paid. So getting paid. So what does that mean? That means that a lot of times a solo practitioner will be excited about getting a client. They won't want to turn the client away. They won't take a fee in advance. And so I would often say that the most important thing for you when you're starting a solo practice is to make sure that you're getting paid for the work that you're doing. So that means getting paid up front. That means making sure that you're not in a position where you need to stop work on a client because they're not paying you. You always want to make sure you're getting paid. And that really is one of the hardest business aspects of starting your own practice. Is this client going to pay me? Are they going to give me money for my work? Because this is kind of what most solos, like the biggest issue they have is getting paid. So if you're doing work for other people, you need to get paid. You typically want to get paid in advance. And I can't stress that enough. This is the biggest problem that solos have. And then in terms of client expectations and managing the business, managing the business means spending a lot of time marketing before you do anything. So I would stress to you that you want to make sure that you're in a position where you know what you want to do, where you have a practice area, or if you're in a large city or where practice areas picked out, where you think about how you're going to market the service and where you have some enthusiasm for it. So that doesn't mean like learning one thing, just like Google AdWords. It means trying to learn a lot of things, how to market, how to sell, all those sorts of things. So you should always try to be a student in that. And then in terms of managing client expectations, a lot of solos do not do any type of self-development. So they don't go to CLE things and seminars, take classes online about how to develop business. So those are all things that I would recommend. Again, the optimal time is really when you're ready to do it. You don't want to do it before it's too late. So like I said earlier, I think that when you're trying to start a solo practice, you want to do it at a time when you don't have lots of family obligations, where you can work hard without feeling pressure to be at home, and you're going to be much better off if you do it then. Okay, next question. What are some of the red flags that I should watch for when considering open solo practice? I've heard that it can be difficult to balance business management and legal work. What are the warning signs that would indicate that a solo practice might be sustainable for the long term for someone like me who has worked mostly for larger firms? Okay, well, I think the biggest thing, the biggest red flag for anybody opening their own solo practice would be to not feel confidence in what you're doing. So you need to believe in what you're doing, and you need to feel that you can do better on your own than working for someone else. So what does that mean? So when I was in college, well, even before I was in college, but when I was in high school, I read motivational books by Tony Robbins, like Unlimited Power, and I read Think and Grow Rich and all these things. And I became very inspired to open a business as opposed to taking a summer job like my classmates were doing in advertising agencies and General Motors and things like that. That was what got me excited. It got me excited to have my own business, and I started an asphalt ceiling business in Detroit. That was very exciting to me. I realized that here I was, I could be on my own and do all these things. And, after my first year of law school or college, I had a nice car and an apartment and all these things during the summer. And because I realized that having my own business was very exciting to me, it was something I wanted to do as opposed to working for someone else. I just realized it like very, very early in my when I was young, and it appealed to me. So does that appeal to you? Are you the sort of person that would feel more confident doing something on their own, or do you not feel that way? So if you don't feel that way, then you really shouldn't be opening your solo practice. You need to be thinking from this perspective of, I want to have my own business. That's what's important to me. I don't want to have to work for others. That's what matters to me, is I want to have that sort of independence. And so if you don't have that, then a solo practice isn't the right decision for you. It's absolutely wrong. But if you don't, have that, then you shouldn't do it. You need to have that confidence in yourself and belief that you would rather work on your own than for someone else. I'm just reading these questions. Okay, so there's a couple questions like this. I'm just going to answer this one, and I apologize if I don't. It doesn't sound like I'm answering everyone's, but this is a question. We discussed the flexibility of running a solo practice, but also mentioned the potential for burnout due to handling administrative and legal tasks on your own. For someone like me who values work-life balance, would you say that joining a law firm where support staff and resources available might be better to prevent burnout and focus solely on legal work? Okay, so this is another question that actually raises quite a few issues, and I'll just answer it very, very succinctly. If you want to have a successful business, you're going to have to work hard. If you want to have a successful business, you're going to have to work, in most cases, harder than others doing the same business. So you shouldn't open a solo practice realistically because you want a work-life balance. If you want a work-life balance, that may be something that you can do in a solo practice, of course. But to start a business, you're going to need to work long hours to be successful. And if you're trying to start a solo practice for work-life balance, it's certainly possible. I mean, I've seen mothers do it and handle a limited number of matters and things. But for the most part, having a solo practice, especially when you start it, you're going to have to work very hard because you're starting a business. And you can't say, I want to start a business so I can have work-life balance. Typically, when you start a business, you're going to need to put in a lot of time to get it off the ground. There's going to be a lot of challenges and things that don't go right and learning experiences. So I don't think necessarily you should. I don't know that starting your own solo practice is a good idea if you're looking for work-life balance. I think to start your own business, you're going to have to believe you're going to realize you're going to have to work really hard, and unless you don't want to be same question. The next question. I understand the allure of being your own boss in a solo practice, but how do solo attorneys compete with larger firms when it comes to marketing budgets and resources? Wouldn't working in a law firm with dedicated marketing and business development teams provide significant advantage to building a client base? Okay, so this is a pretty simple question to answer. So if you're starting your own practice, you don't want to start something where you're competing with large law firms. You need to take the sorts of matters that they wouldn't take. So that means working for smaller clients, and it means bringing in your own work. And it's as I told you earlier, it's not too difficult to bring in your own work if you go to a place where you're in a practice area where there's a lot of hunger for people like you. That may be hunger for people that do family law, or maybe hungry for personal injury attorneys, or maybe in a geographic area. But you typically, when you're starting your own practice, you're going to have to do consumer work, meaning working for people, or for small companies or smaller businesses, and smaller businesses. And in both cases, you're going to do, if you're working for people, you're going to be doing the work that they could never have a larger firm doing. And big firm to high fees. Let's just think about that. Or work that a company, the smaller businesses are going to never afford an attorney. So Your niche is doing work for smaller clients that can't afford large firms. So you're not competing with large firms. You're really only competing with other people trying to get work, consumers, meaning individuals or smaller businesses. So you're not competing with large law firms. That's the exact opposite. Okay, you starting a solo practice seems like a significant time commitment, especially in terms of marketing and business development. Wouldn't time be better spent honing my legal skills in a law firm environment where those aspects are already handled, allow me to focus on casework and advancement of the firm? Yeah, so if you can get a job in a firm, it's a good opportunity to get experience in whatever practice area or practice group. Like I say, transactional work is a practice group, and litigation is a practice group, meaning transactional work teaches you skills you can use in trust in estates and all these different things, and litigation teaches you skills you can use and if you want to do employment lawsuits and all these things. So these sorts of things, you can learn in a law firm. But yeah, I mean, a solo practice is a big time commitment, but at the same time, the rewards are much greater. But you have to be the sort of person that knows that that's what they want to do. Like you have to be in a position where you say to yourself, like, this is what I want for my life and my career, and it has to be something that kind of comes naturally to you. That the desire to work on your own becomes something that you really, really want. So I guess I've answered kind of the biggest group of questions that people have today. I think the biggest question that I have for you is, what do you want for your life? Because if you have a legal degree, if you have passed the bar, you have the decision of what you want to do with your life. And what does that mean? That means, do you want to work for others? Do you want to have independence? Do you want to have a business? Do you want to work for a business? These are all major life decisions. So working for a business means working for a law firm. Working on your own means starting your own firm. So you just want to think about what it is that you want for your career in life. And it's very common for groups of a couple of attorneys to break off from big firms because they don't like having their compensation controlled by the big firms and all these things. But you have to decide what it is that you want. I would say, as I said earlier, as a young attorney, it's a good idea to get exposed to how to do work in a law firm. But not everybody has that option. If you don't have that option, starting your own practice is really an awesome idea. Or if you're unhappy in a law firm, you'll never be happy, which is a ton of people. It's a good idea. There's all these people, they get experience in law firms, and then their goal is to go in-house again and work for someone else because they feel like that's the best option. But many times those same people should really thinking about starting their own firms. And that just requires a different level of confidence. It requires interest in business. It requires the ability to think about marketing, think about niches and all that to become successful. But all really good questions today. I appreciate everybody being here. I think this was, if you're thinking about doing it, I've never seen, I'm sure there are, but anybody, go in as much depth as we have today. And I commend everybody for spending the time on this and just all around great learning experience. And thanks for sticking around and listening to this. I think it's going to make you much more successful, make better decisions. Thanks.